You're listening to the Valley Current.
Oh, here we go.
There you got a nice.
Yay! Oh my God.
You're fully.
Oh, you've lost some weight, my friend.
You're fully wired there, aren't you?
Got to keep up with the Russos. Oh my God. You look great.
Yeah, I've lost about 40 pounds. I'm working on losing another 40 to get back to that high school athlete I used to be.
I think I found it. The weight, I mean, use that one.
So I wanted to pick your brain for a minute, and I know we need to catch up, but Silicon Valley seems to be on fire in terms of artificial intelligence talent. People that know how to build artificial intelligence systems, whether it's neural networks or machine learning or all the keywords that are out there, and you're in the talent business. So I'm kind of curious, how do you manage to deal with all the demands? There must be a million different requests made of you every day for find me this, find me that. And there isn't enough talent in Silicon Valley. And I was curious, do you go outside Silicon Valley, or do they really want people who still theoretically can show up at an office because we're supposedly at the end of this pandemic? But then you hear that Microsoft is not bringing people back in for maybe a few more months, nor is Apple and a few other big companies. So what's your take on the talent wars and how it's playing out in Silicon Valley?
Okay, that is a great question, and there's a lot in there. So let's unpack it. Let's start with the AI piece.
Right.
AI, everyone's touting AI, but it's really not hard and fast or defensible. It's more like screening. AI has yet to be, truly capture, say, the soft skills. Can I rely on Jack? Is Jack friendly?
Right.
So it can screen the no-brainers, but it has to be, what's the word? Calibrated. You have to constantly update it because it only learns. It's only as good as the people doing it. So it's not really defensible. There's a few companies that are really good at it. One in particular, it's called Hired Score. But the challenge is a lot of people say they do it. And to your point, we can do it for assessments, Jack. We can do it. I saw a really cool platform the other day that can tell you, actually, and it works. This is defensible when it loads up all the company's Zoom calendars, all the employees' Zoom calendars, anything they're doing with emails, and not like their browsing history. It's not that invasive, but they can tell you when someone's about to leave because they're too busy.
Really?
They're not. Yeah, exactly.
Really?
And really, it's very interesting. It's not inexpensive, but it's a great little platform. But just to stay on point, because you asked a lot. So AI is not here yet without compunction or impunity, but it's on its way and it's getting better. But the other part, you ask a good question. It's all over the place. Now a lot of the power has gone into the candidates' hands. There are more jobs than there are candidates, particularly the hard to fill ones. So those people are really playing hard to get, fielding multiple offers, putting companies against each other. And it's hard. No, LinkedIn's not working as well. So now companies are relying on sourcing tools that scrub the internet and build out a profile on Jack Russo based on your I'm making this up, but based on your Facebook, your Instagram, your Snapchat, your LinkedIn. Maybe you did something on Overstack or GitHub if you're a software engineer. So it slowly builds out a profile on Jack Russo, complete with your personal email address, your postal address, your cell phone number, whatever they can get. And that's very effective for the, because these are people that aren't looking. In fact, they're hiding. So accessing those people. But there is a crunch on talent, and everyone's building the plane. Now they're flying it, Jack. So no one's figured it out. I just heard on the news that Biden wants to make it mandatory for federal employees to be vaccinated. And he's trying to pass some legislation for privately held companies to make vaccination a mandate. And I did a an event, something for that talent acquisition leadership council that, I facilitate. And you've been to one of the events back before the pandemic. And I had an attorney come in and present the legality of it all. Like, can you insist? And you can't, you can't do that. If I don't feel safe in your work environment, you can't make me come in. So, but companies are starting to say, okay, it's a hybrid, you can come in 3 days a week or whatever. But again, if I'm a purple squirrel, I'm a bilingual data scientist that speaks Cantonese and French, and I can work in my pajamas from the bathroom, and they'll be happy about it. So that's the answer to that question.
I mean, do you worry that it's becoming kind of an impersonal business, because your business has a lot of evaluative soft skills, right? You can't just process a resume. Those things have been around forever. You help people install that stuff. But generally speaking, that's just like an initial screen, right? That's not really how you make a judgment call. That's more of like getting through all the noise, right?
Right.
I mean, how do you imagine, if you're a company, filling all the need that's out there once you decide to go forward with the new development or whatever you decide to go forward with? And then all this talent is changing, musical chairs, it seems like every 2 years.
That's exactly right. Now companies are saying, it used to be, hey, what can we do to keep you here? Now companies are actually, it's counterintuitive, but if you think about it, it makes sense. Now they're saying, hey, look, Jack's going to be here. I think the average is under 3 years. Across the board. So, okay, if Jack's going to only be here for 3 years, I'm going to make it the best 3 years Jack ever had. So when he leaves, not if, when he leaves, he says, you know what? I loved working at the hierarchy or at your law firm or anywhere. So that, because they realize, hey, they're not going to stay for on average, more than 3 years. So there's that. But the other piece is, these companies, the majority of the clients that I'm working with, so this isn't representative. There's always going to be, Starbucks is always going to need baristas. Amazon's always going to need people to stuff boxes. UPS is always going to need drivers. Comcast is always going to need cable installers. Okay, that's the submit my resume and be considered. But most of the positions, the majority of the positions that I'm helping employers with, the people that they're looking for aren't looking. So right away, they're not even going into the applicant tracking system. You're having to hire a recruiter to use a sourcing tool to find you, engage you, put you into some sort of talent community or some sort of relationship, start sending you. They've got some really sophisticated software, Jack. So I can see that Jack Russo logged on to my career portal 2 weeks ago, watched one video on what it's like to work here, spent 2.5 minutes on the benefits page, went through, looked at 5 jobs, and went a third of the way through the application process and then dropped off. So I can capture your email and then I can send you an email. I have a CRM and I say, hey, Jack, I noticed that you logged onto our site and you looked at a video on photosynthesis. I see that you're a biologist and you know what a pistil is and a stamen. So here's an article that you might find useful. So kind of, again, nurturing that relationship. So it's not like, hey, come work for us. That dog doesn't hunt anymore. Now it's like, hey, Jack, I just want to be friends. So heaven forbid perish the thought you are interested. I mean, the line I use, Jack, is what are you going to say to me, Jack, that's going to make me leave my kick-ass rock star job at Facebook to go to Google or whatever, Genentech to Pfizer? I mean, they all have all you can eat food. They all have great benefits. They all have, whatever. They're very similar. So it really boils down to what you said originally. It's like, I want to work with you, Jack, because I like you and I believe in the culture of the values. And that's very difficult to express through Zoom or automation or AI. That is a personal thing. And so
it must be more about paying people to refer their friends in then, right?
Well, that's always been a big source of of candidate inflow, but one of the concerns there is we don't want everybody to be the same. We want diversity. If everybody is friends with Andrew and they're all Andrew's friend, then it's kind of, they want, at a certain size, an employee referral program is not helpful. It's cool and it's useful, but it's not incredibly valuable because we want different people from different, especially now with the emphasis on diversity and inclusion.
Right. So do you see people sort of trying to use you more for the consulting aspect, or do you see people still using you to sort of create the tech stack and get the technology to work right? Like, what are you seeing happen here? Because you do both.
That's a good question, Jack. So what I'm seeing happen is companies are trying to be more creative and resourceful about how they're generating not just applicant flow, but interest. How are we getting people into our system, whether it's a talent community or the actual application process itself? And can we use technology to do that? Maybe. And if so, what are the best? But most people are kind of, LinkedIn's had a corner on the market for years. It's kind of the only game in town. Well, now that's not true. Now we've talked a little bit about this, but LinkedIn's model is you pay a lot of money and you get job slots, which are the equivalent of job postings. You get a career page on LinkedIn and you get a certain number of recruiter seat licenses. So I can log on to LinkedIn and I can look at anybody's profile. Then I send you an email if I find you, and then you may or may not respond. And it's very expensive. And the results, the ROI on LinkedIn is slipping, and LinkedIn's prices are going up. So what I'm seeing a lot of is it's actually kind of interesting because now it's like almost going back to 101 quarter billboards, leaflets out of airplanes, television commercials.
Really?
Yeah, well, Google, I think at some ungodly number, like over 80% of people start their job search with Google. They write in Palo Alto software engineering jobs, and then the results come up, and they're all AdWords. The majority, the organic results are buried under 10 or 20 AdWord sponsored ads that maybe Indeed bought, or Indeed/Glassdoor, as you know, they merged, or they bought Glassdoor bought Indeed, or vice versa. Maybe it's
I think Indeed is a Japanese company, right? I'm trying to remember. There's some company in Japan that I think, I'm just trying to remember.
Not to my knowledge. Glassdoor and Indeed have merged, and Glassdoor remembers the company that you log on to say, I hate this company, because I can put anonymous.
Yeah. So what happens then? You don't get the real skinny anymore, or do you get
No, you still do, but it's kind of a pay. I'm talking out of school, but there's a bit of an element of a pay to play. Glassdoor's whole rap is, hey, we're going to give you a transparent insight into what the culture is like at, and again, I'm making this up, Genentech or Roku. But if I have like Netflix does not pay a cent to Glassdoor. You can still look at the Glassdoor reviews, whether Netflix buys their career page on them or does job postings with them or not. But I don't want, personally and philosophically, I'm not real keen on hiring someone that's gonna base their experience on an anonymous. People aren't going to go on there. Most of the reviews on Glassdoor are spurned by negativity or a sour experience.
Right. And it's pretty negative. Everything there is pretty negative.
But companies are getting smarter. And I'm, helping them, like, say, hey, you don't have to pay Glassdoor. Just when you onboard someone, say, hey, could you write a review saying, did you have a positive experience? Yes. Well, then could you write a review? Because, the reviews bubble to the top, the recent ones won. So you can kind of play that game.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's probably the right way to do it. Like, you suppress all the bad stuff to the bottom. No one goes to the bottom anymore, right? That's fundamentally the way it works, isn't it?
That's right.
Right.
Well, and I I'm not going to base. Here's the thing about Glassdoor, Jack. If I'm going to Japan, I'm going to go to TripAdvisor at some point just to see. I mean, it's almost a fait accompli. But that said, I'd much rather have my own experience. If this is not a shoe buy, right? This is a really, I'm going to go to work for this company. And ironically, the millennials are really interested in values and missions and what are we doing here? I'm making this up, but do I want to work?
You have to have a social. You have to have a social element. Then is what you're saying.
Yeah, you have to have some sort of attraction or allure. If I'm going to help cure cancer, that's a lot more interesting than me helping you figure out how to keep people on your site for an extra hour because you've gamified it. That's not very much. And, we could unwind that thing all for the full podcast about, okay, so some people are in it for the dough, but not surprisingly, millennials are at a point in their lives where they want to make a difference. They want to make an impact. They want to make the world a better place. And frankly, companies are interested in engaging those people. And at the risk of contradicting myself, if I'm setting up for Jack's only going to be here for 2 or 3 years, then I'm going to make it the best I'm going to make Jack so happy that when he leaves, he says, you know what? I'm so glad I worked at the hierarchy. I learned a lot. They treated me with dignity and respect. They gave me fair compensation. I was treated really well, and I would work there again. That's what these companies, and then if you stick, great. But heaven forbid you don't, at least I left you with a good taste in your mouth. And I think that's just common sense, Jack.
Right.
Which isn't so common, it turns out.
But there has to be this gamification to make sure that they're getting people that are actually going to sort of, do what needs to be done to sort of game the various systems that are out there, right? That's your point about how Glassdoor works, right? They have to make that all work in a way that's going to be successful, right? In many ways?
Yes. Well, what I would say to you is what I'm seeing a lot of, and it's not new, is that an employer brand, we all have a brand. I've heard it said, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Right.
And a smart employer, brand strategy, an EVP, an employer value proposition or employee value proposition is not created, it's uncovered. In other words, you have a brand. So you can't say, hey, you know what, Andrew, this is the coolest place to work. We just play video games and fool around and we make a ton of dough and you can have as many snacks as you want. But if I go there and it's not that, there are no video games, there are no snacks, then you've disqualified yourself. You've misrepresented who you are. So an employer brand is uncovered, but companies are becoming more. It's a slippery slope because a lot of agencies charge mad money to do an EVP. I mean, some companies charge upwards of $200,000 to do focus groups and surveys and on and on and on. And it doesn't need to be that complicated to my way of thinking. I think the real magic happens is how can you be strategic and resourceful and get your message or your content in front of the right people.
Right.
I mean, there's this, you've heard me say post and pray or spray and pray. We're going to boil the ocean. No. Where are these? Who are we? It's kind of like beginning with the end in mind. Who are we trying to reach? What's the call to action? And let's make it so easy. I was working with this kid. He's so bright. His name's Garrett Deese. He's military. He's probably in his mid-30s, and he's Army, and he's in charge of a lot of stuff at Dropbox. But he's a veteran, and he's very passionate about veterans.
Right.
And so I was talking with him about, what he's doing for Dropbox. They've put him in charge of their ERG, Employee Resource Group for veterans, because he's a great advocate and diplomat for that. And his thing is, hey, I'm going to create a page. It's just so when Jack logs on, it says, hey, so glad you showed up. What's your name? Not, could you fill up this form that tells me how tall you are and how much you weigh and, are you some of these things are so invasive. So how can you just what you said, how can you humanize or personalize the experience, especially the initial one, where it's not so, hey, take our great job, you're perfect. It's like, you don't even know me.
Right.
So slowing it down and being thoughtful and intentional about the whole process, so that when I have the bad day and I'm ready to change jobs, I remember that Jack Russo treated me with dignity and respect. He didn't jam me up. He didn't strong arm me. He sent me a really cool link to a podcast or to a blog that was relevant to me. He followed up. He didn't push. He pulled.
Right.
And that's another key point. Like, are we screening in or are we screening out? Zoom has a completely different problem, Jack. Zoom's problem is we're getting 11 billion applications from people that are just unilaterally applying to 12 different jobs, regardless of whether or not they're qualified. And they have to, once you're in a company's applicant tracking system, it has to go through this rigorous battery of checks and balances to make sure that it's compliant with all the OFCCP regulations. And so Zoom's problem isn't applicant flow, it's quality, not noise, to use your earlier comment.
Right.
So the game's the same.
Mm-hmm.
The players have changed and the rules have changed.
I mean, the game is the same, and it's getting highly automated, but it sounds like the automation can only go so far, right?
That's right.
Automation just can't go. I mean, it can't go in the direction that one would imagine, which is perfect automation, because it's such an imperfect, it's like a dating world. It's
exactly, that's the best. That's a very apt analogy, Jack. It's exactly like that. That's exactly what it's like. So you can you can leverage technology to drive efficiency and like screen people out or screen people in and get rid of, like, if you're not from this country, okay, then, probably not a fit. And so you can do some very subtle blocking and tackling up front to take, 200 submissions down to about 20 or 30 utilizing AI. But to your earlier comment or observation about how personal it is and how noisy it is and frothy and COVID and multiple bids, and, people are really, I think this as well as anybody, Jack. I mean, COVID has had a pronounced effect on people's lives personally and professionally. It's like, hey, wait a minute. What am I really doing here? Like, I just worked from home for 18 months and it was fine. I mean, here's a great point for you. I was talking, I mentioned I got an attorney to talk about the legality of what's an employer's fiduciary responsibility to candidates and to employees about vaccination and masking and on and reentry to the workforce. And this one guy said, Andrew, half of the people that we've onboarded in the last year haven't even been to our office because it was after COVID. I mean, how do I sell them on our company culture when they've never even been in our office? That's a real problem.
Right. They're probably not even meeting in person, right? They're probably isn't even an actual live meeting. I mean, what are the odds that years ago you would ever do something without having 3, 4, or 5 live meetings, right?
That's such a good point. I had a guy that I have a lot of stock in. He was at Ancestry and now he's at 10X Genomics. It was at Gilead for years. He built that company, hired that, got him from 2,000 employees to 15,000 employees. He was so used to spending so much money flying people in and multiple interviews. He's like, dude, we can do this all with Zoom. My hiring budget just got cut in half because the efficacy with Zoom is comparable to flying people in. I mean, if you're thoughtful about it. And that was a really key takeaway. So employers I think what I'm starting to realize is that, again, company necessity is the mother of invention. So companies are getting more resourceful, the good ones anyways, are getting more resourceful, more strategic, and it's getting harder and harder. People are getting better at hiding. People are getting, more sophisticated, but choosier about what they're going to do. My time is valuable. This COVID business has really had a profound impact on people's. I mean, even you and me. it's like, hey, the road is getting narrower. Like I want to spend my time in a way that is meaningful, where I'm making a difference and an impact, and I want to be happy. I want to, there's a old parable about people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. So it's very personal these days. And the more companies try to automate and artificially, enhance the process, it doesn't always work out that well.
Well, I think the other thing we're going to see is people retiring earlier because they're going to say, there's not the same social positives from working, because they're not really working with people anymore. They're working in more of a chain of Zoom meetings that seem more artificial than real, right? So I bet in the long run, what might have been something like people working 40 to 50 years as their work span, I bet we're going to see over the next 100 years people working more like 30 years. I mean, I get calls all the time from entrepreneurs that say in their 40s, look, I'm looking to sell my business and exit. I want to do other things. I don't really want to be working. It's a weird thing. You didn't hear that years ago. People enjoyed the idea of work, the idea of sort of being part of a team, the idea of being a serial entrepreneur. I'm not sure serial entrepreneurship is going to happen.
I think you're right.
I mean, if I asked you if you found the perfect acquisition.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this episode of The Valley Current.